Hello, Internet. This is Kopitem Council once again. And as always, I am Hafiz and always also with Adi. A lot of things happen in Malaysia and regionally and internationally this week. But before we go to what we talk about, how's you been? I mean, how this week for you, Adi?
Yeah, I think people would be remiss if I don't mention this, but yeah, I think we have to apologize for, we missed recording for 1 week, and I have to apologize for that because I was actually on a holiday. Hafiz knows this. I just came back, I think at the time of recording on Thursday, I just came back from Istanbul, Turkey, which at this moment I can say is my favorite European city. Now, maybe some might get their knots in a twist whether they want to call it European or not. It's still partially on the continent, both Europe and Asia, so I can still qualify it as a European city. But that said, it's been great, Hafiz. I had came back rejuvenated. I think a few more ideas came into my head on what we can do for the podcast and ideas as well. So if any of the audience here would like to hear more about the trips that I made to Istanbul, then feel free to let me know in the comments, and then maybe Hafiz will be like doing an interview style, like what's good to eat here or where to go or things like that. Because I think I ran the whole gauntlet of things to do in Istanbul in the 1 week that I was there.
Sounds fantastic. I mean, this is a good segue for any one of you running a travel agency company and just want to sponsor us. And then Adi can put few good words about all of your destinations. It's not just going to be Istanbul, isn't it? It's going to be Eastern Europe or Western Europe, anything. So if you're running these companies, please contact us down below and you know where to reach us. Moving on to the actual matter that why we are sitting today is the parliament already convened just this week in the, Monday, I think. It's already 1 week. And on Friday, it's been long awaited by every year, annually by Malaysians. I don't know why they waited so much, but what's the fuzz?
Well, Parliament has introduced the budget for 2025. Usually it gets read out in early or mid-October. And this will decide the fiscal direction that the government of Malaysia is going to be taking over the next year, how much money is going to be spent, what kind of money is being poured into, and what is the general idea and theme that our Prime Minister and also Finance Minister, Dr. Sri Anwar Ibrahim, is going to be taking. What is the approaches that he is going to address some of the economic issues, financial responsibilities that the government of Malaysia will be addressing in the year to come. So that is the main highlight. Of course, there were other things that was being read in Parliament. One of it is the controversial amendment to the citizenship bill. I think we can save that for another episode. I think there are people who I think are more qualified and more interested with a bigger stake into this issue. But I think for just this one, we're going to do a brief rundown on what we thought about the budget here. So you want to go first, Hafiz?
Before I'm going to go first, if you can summarize the budget in one word, what do you call it?
If one word, I would say, okay. Okay, fundamental. Right. Fundamental okay. Is what the word. Operative word. Fundamental. Better than okay.
Okay. Okay. For me, Adi, it would be brave on certain things because this is just like I think 2024 last year's budget. This is another a budget where a lot of things introduced and a lot of things that in the past we say, this kind of thing requires political will. Now, this is a political will from the Madadi government to at least rationalize the subsidy. That's one thing out of many, I think, that I'm going to talk about in this episode. So, the infamous, because this year we started with diesel, right? So people say like, hey, most of us don't drive diesel cars, so it's okay. Now it's the RON 95. This is the big chunk of it. And as Prime Minister mentioned, the top 15 and the foreigners are enjoying 40% of the subsidies equivalent of 8 billion ringgits. And this 8 billion ringgits should be distributed to more purposeful venue. And this is, I think, another step in the right direction. Yes, we might be affected in terms of paying more, but in the long run, this is a good for our country, provided what being planned out or laid out by Prime Minister is followed to the T. Of course, leakages is a greatest enemy of any budget, but this is the proposal, and we have to give trust and our time to the Madani government. Otherwise, it won't work. That's first thing that I would like to highlight in terms of the budget. How about you, Adi? Your first impression?
Okay, this is something that I've always wanted to define when it comes to the Prime Minister's economic outlook and this whole Madani framework. And I don't see a lot of people defining it properly. I think when we want to characterize the approaches taken by the Prime Minister, it's similar to what I would say a social democrat approach, is that there's going to be a lot more emphasis on state responsibility. The state is going to be taking care of a lot of the economic growth and driver for the Malaysian economy, that they do not want to go what Mahathir did in the 90s, which was to go for mass sweeping privatization. No, this one, Prime Minister, I think, was want to emphasize private to public relationships. And this is going to emphasize more on government spending, fiscal responsibility of the government side, and at the same time, the other key important, which of the Madani framework, is inclusivity. This is going to be achieved through taxing more on people who are at the T15 or T20 end of the economic spectrum. That there's going to be more tax burdens on them, but at the same time, it's going to be redistributed back to people in the M40 or B40 groups. So this is a very social democrat approach. And I think if you want to make a comparison, it is an approach taken by the Scandinavian countries, which I think for a lot of Malaysians have been very supportive of. I find it hard to see that Malaysian is a full-on capitalist or even a full-on taking on a full-on socialist or communist approach. So PSM, if you're listening to this, any members of PSM, I think this is going to be more into your favor, as this is going to be a classic redistribution of wealth so that it is more inclusive of everyone, but it's not at the same time seizing the benefits or the prospects of people who are already in the wealthy tax bracket. So this is something that I think in this budget clearly defines the approaches that the Prime Minister is to take. It is a mixture of being practical but also ideologically driven to ensure that the grassroots and the rural economy is operating and will be given a fair share of the biggest share of the pie. So that is another one takeaway I want to make from this, which is the ideological framework, which is the Madani framework. So in a way, it's going to be ensuring that if people at the lower end of the economic spectrum can prosper, which is going to make up a huge share of the tax demographic, it's the understanding that if people at the larger demographic has more incentives or reliefs, then is going to be translate to wider economic growth, wider spending from across the board. That economic spending or tax collection isn't just going to be focused at the upper end. It's also going to be more spread out, which in turn would create more revenue. I think this is the thinking that the government of the day is trying to push on about, is going to tackle on. And if it increases revenue, then it also helps with the fiscal debt that the government is going through. I think is operating at about 65% and it has dropped for about 4% since last year. It's aiming to seek to reduce it by 4%. So I think this is more of a long-term strategy that this budget is going for.
And I don't want to bore our listeners with some statistics that already, a lot of video cover it. Or, I mean, you all of you can read it yourself. There's a PDF been shared around, isn't it? But here's my 3 takeaways. I mean, slightly under the surface, not on just scratching it, but something that I see beyond the numbers and figures. So first, number 1, I would like to touch on the universal basic income. The idea of cash handout in Malaysia is not new. It's been implemented since 2013 by Najib Razak. So at the time, the implementation was, it's a lump sum, like sometimes annually, whatever given. So no economists argue that universal basic income is a bad thing. It's a good thing. But what's still up for a debate is the implementation. So what I can see from Madani government since last year is how they try to move from giving a big chunk of lump sum every year to more ration it to a monthly, some sort of allowance. So it's something a permanent. Every month you get like a salary from the government. That's what universal basic income is. And why this is important, Adi? Because it will affect the rakyat's habit, because it will change how they think about the money that they receive. So, for example, last time, if they get a chunk of 1,000 or 1,500 ringgit or even more, so they were in their head, they were thinking like, I'm only going to get this once a year. Why don't I splurge it on the newest gadget? Because why not, right? I have the money. I never get a chance to do this. And if I don't do this, I might wait for another year to do it. So that would be another type of mindset for people who actually had, suddenly a 2,000, 3,000 ringgit suddenly given by the government in their bank account. For now, when they government Madani try to make it like allowance, it will be a much smaller amount, but it will be consistent. So in a way, it will teach the rakyat, the consumer, thinking like, oh, I only have 300 ringgit for the month of January. So I should be more prudent with what I'm doing with this. So this will goes to my groceries, whatever necessities that it's supposed to be spent on. So those are just slight implementation, slight change, but I think the effect will be massive. If people see that, oh, they're gonna know that they're gonna get extra 300 ringgit per month for the next 12 months. Yeah, sure, why not? I'm gonna better plan my finances with my wife or my spouse, and then definitely gonna be more prudent in terms of how I spend this 300 ringgit. It might sound small, the 300 ringgit, but when you look at the impact, it will be better. So that's first. Another thing that I would like to touch on is the how the government tried to find ways so that the food could reach the recipients, and this is directly impacted the leakages when the audit report released next year. So what it means is that last time the government find tried an error where they can channel the funds and whatnot. So with this money, the government, they try to be as efficient as possible, so that this money will trickle down definitely to the B40 M40s. So with this, by being efficient in this sense, next year the AG report, the auditor report that we're gonna get, is it will contribute less to the leakages. Then this will contribute to the Madani government framework, where they want to fight against corruption. They want to fight against leakages. So this will help them in terms of achieving their KPI, whatever that they put on in the last year, right? They put it. So this announcement of no mega project is in a way saying that, hey, no splurging on big projects, mega projects, but we're going to use this amount of money and put it into distribute as wide as possible, so that leakages will be minimized. And of course, enforcement is another thing as well. So hopefully in the next year, with this action and better enforcement, it will be better. Just last thing on what I would like, what I saw in terms of what beyond the words by the Prime Minister is how important to have representative in the cabinet. Now I'm talking in terms of we Sabahans or Sarawakians. It's not accident that last year Sabah had I think around 6 billion allocation. Then this time around 6.7, an increment. Also with Sarawak, this has happened, I think, because we have Deputy Prime Minister from Sarawak, and of course Armizan in the cabinet and others as well, Iwan Benedict as well. So by having this representative in cabinet, we can, consistently push for our demand for better allocations and whatnot in the future. So this is to say that whatever that people speculate, hey, it's not don't be middle in federal issues, whatever. Sabah is for Sabah. I think this is time to reflect back and see, maybe it's good that we have a GPS represented there, or I don't know, whatever, GRS, so that this can be done. And we know it works, at least under Madadi government. I'm not so sure with other administration, so that it will be our, step into the right direction. And yes, I think I'm really liking how Deputy Prime Minister from Sarawak doing this.
Yeah, I think it's always commendable when year by year they have increased the allocation to Sabah and Sarawak. But I've always said this before, and I'll continue to say it again. Despite always increasing the allocation and always being a yearly record high, record-breaking allocation year by year, the distribution mechanism still hasn't been resolved. It's still on a ad hoc basis where the allocation is given. It's not given or released lump sum to the Sabah or Sarawak state government. So what you have is a situation that by the end of the fiscal year, not all the allocation is being utilized because it's still held up by the federal government. So it is released on a needs basis based on what the state government requires at the time, and that requires a lot of bureaucratic oversight as well of bureaucratic clearance to make sure that those money do get through. So if you want to be cynical, you have to look how much of the increased allocation is taken from the unused allocation from the previous year. So, of course, it's always nice to say on the slogan to say that we've increased it year on year. The biggest ever allocation for Sabah and Sarawak is a very good slogan to paint onto election campaigns. But we also have to look at the underlying factors here, that the distribution mechanism still does not facilitate the maximization of these allocations itself. So that's just one thing. Another thing is that because you were talking about how people are to spend their money, to buy groceries or basic needs and all that, it also highlights another factor or another wrinkle in how we do economic planning, is that economic planning is still largely remain up to the government to decide the direction of, is that they still have a role to play in the daily lives of how we spend our money. For example, I think the recent one was about they're going to put more taxes on mixed or processed drinks, such as things with high sugar and all that. So your Coca-Colas, your Pepsis and all that would probably be considered to be a bit more expensive. And that is not out of an accident. That is also meant to regulate a sustainable and healthier lifestyle, considering that Malaysia does chart the obesity rates compared to our neighbors in Southeast Asia. And this is just another way to say, okay, we're going to disincentivize people from buying these drinks, but at the same time, it's a great way to generate revenue. So, of course, you might see that, okay, this is a sustainable practice. It's very, we have to commend the government for pursuing such admirable goals. But at the same time, it's also another way that the government still has the state has a huge influence on our daily lives as well. And this is not too different from a lot of other social democratic countries. So this also I'm just trying to underscore again, the social democratic approach that the Prime Minister and the Madani government is moving towards. It's trying to unseat the elites, which the Prime Minister has went on against over the past month, making claims saying that the elites in English-speaking elites in London, we're not in London, but we still speak English. So, Prime Minister, please don't hold it against us. But it's on. I think it kind of segues back into his whole idea of promoting the whole national identity agenda, at the same time trying to unseat or unhinge the status quo monopolies or elites that have been placed up or propped up by his former mentor, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. So, in a way, this is Anwar cementing his decision to how he wants to shape the economy. And it's not going to let it be on business basis, that the private firms aren't going to be the ones calling the shots. The government is still going to hold a short leash on a lot of private businesses, which is why we have all these grants. We have all these assistance programs for smaller businesses so that they can tap into the market share and dilute the existing monopolies and existing big companies. So that is another aspect, a facet of the economic policies that this government is going to be moving towards. And I think the next shift, because they did say rationalization, subsidy rationalization is going to continue on an ongoing basis. And so other types of tax reforms is going to be on an ongoing basis. So I wouldn't be surprised if we would see Budget 2026 doubles down on some of these this logic here of redistribution of wealth back to people who are in the lower economic scale.
And another thing that I should highlight as well, apart from the extra increment of allocation for Sabah and Sarawak, is that the creation of the cancer hospital in Kuching and also heart specialist hospital in KK. Like it's just two hospitals, but the impact to all the people in Borneo will be huge, Adi, because most of the specialist hospitals that we have now currently are centered in Klang Valley. So the heart specialist IJN is in Klang Valley, the cancer specialist hospital is in Putrajaya. So if you were suffering and needs to be referred to any of the specialist hospital, so let's say if you are in Lahadatu, you have to fly all over to Kuala Lumpur. But now with the creations of cancer and heart specialist hospital, those who are in Lahadatu can just travel to KK or to Kuching. So it will cut off a lot of and save a lot of money as well for the Sabahans and Sarawakians. I think this is something that, might be very small in terms of it's just 1 billion ringgit to create the hospital, but the impact I think would be different. But another thing that I'm a bit try to be specific here because I'm a fan of solar and electric vehicle, and as we know in Peninsula Adi, NEM, the net metering policy has been going on for years, but it's not in Sabah. I'm not so sure about Sarawak though, because Sarawak has different. It's not SSB, it's Sarawak Energy, right? So for SSB, there is no such program because this is very important in terms of energy transition. Prime Minister talked about energy transition in his speech as well. Why incentive? He talked about the solar farm in Tasik Kenyir in Terengganu. I mean, if you want to build a solar farm on top of water, the places that could benefit most from this is, I'm sure, the rural places in Sabah. Yes, definitely Terengganu would benefit from it as well because, you're going to be in a lot of industry surrounding it as well. But in terms of who benefited and the rakyat that going to benefit from it, I think Sabah would be the one. And the fact that NEM is not available in Sabah is another hindrance for the Sabahans to participate and contribute to the contributions of ESG better score, like, so we're going to be left behind once again when people in this in Peninsula already installed their solars for for few years now, and the Sabah is not even unheard of. So I think, yeah, this is very specific complaint, but I think it should be addressed or highlighted at least in next budget because this is part of energy transition and we want to be champion of this, and it should be included nationwide, not just Peninsula or Sarawak only or Peninsula only. So that's my pet peeve on one of the Do you have any biggest pet peeves so far, Adi?
I don't think so. I think any more pet peeves and I will sound like I'm very nitpicky. But I think overall, it's this budget, right? Like I said, it's fundamental. It's tackling at a fundamental level of a direction that the Prime Minister, I think, a very personal direction that he wants to take when it comes to planning the economy here. That's why I call it fundamental. And it signals a different shift compared to the previous governments that we've had, which is definitely market-led, despite being handheld by the government. But of course, a lot of it was determined by private organizations, private sectors with ties to the government, and especially since the 90s. So this is a shift away from that. And at least when we say that this is a budget that is going to benefit the people, there are fundamental pathways and avenues towards that as well. It's not just a cash handout and all that, but it's also restructuring the government revenue itself so that more can be given towards different groups and more being taken from groups that already are privileged from it. So that is why I say a fundamental shift as well. I think going back to Sabah and Sarawak, when you mentioned the heart specialist centers in in Sabah and Kuching. I think this is a great way in how they should be moving towards projects or even allocations. It's all in one, it's all packaged in one place, so that all that money definitely has to go somewhere, which is directly to that. So that kind of mentality in terms of allocation should be looked into more when it comes to developing Sabah and Sarawak. For example, Sabah has set up its sovereign wealth fund. That money should find a way to be channeled directly to that wealth fund so that it can be maintained and retained by the Sabah state government itself. So there's a purpose to the allocation itself. There's a direct channel of where that allocation is meant to be or what it is exactly for. That is something that I want to see more moving forward. Clarity into the allocation itself. I think for Sabah that is very much needed, but with Sarawak, which is on the road towards industrialization and having more avenues for revenue generation, I think the allocation over time, it's going to be more of a gesture rather than a necessity compared to the allocation that Sabah receives. So I think good job to the Prime Minister and the government in charge. Let us hope to see that their vision is see through, gets to see it completely through with the whole solar, with the whole green. Then it depends on how well they manage the National Energy Transition Roadmap and the new Industrial Master Plan, the NIMP 2030. So it's going to be funneled straight back into that. The budget can transfer into that. And at the same time, with the Prime Minister becoming more active on the international sphere, attracting investments from both the West and China, perhaps this could be the start of more exciting prospects for Malaysia. That growth is still on the horizon and is not behind us. So looking forward to how it plays out for the next year, and we will see how the budget will look like in 2026. Will it be increased? Will we see any reduction in debt? Will there be more increases in other areas? So I think this year is more of a positive outlook compared to last year's assessment.
Yes, definitely. Especially when he mentioned about fiscal deficit that is projected going to be, decrease year by year. So that's a good news to anyone, especially for those who analysts or those who want to invest in Malaysia, knowing that Malaysia always have that fiscal discipline, not just splurging on nonsense mega projects. That's it for the budget Malaysia 2025. These discussions. If you prefer short versions of this, you might follow us on TikTok and Instagram. If you prefer audio only, you can find out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and of course, video and audio always on YouTube. And next up, we are going to our neighboring country who had just officially assumed office. The president. So, which country was it? Let's find out in the next episode.